Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle.
Welcome back to another episode of the Vantage Influencers Podcast. I'm your host, Sanjeevani, and today we are unpacking a topic that feels especially relevant in today's workplaces: mentoring and coaching, and the real role they play in developing diverse leaders. Too often, these two are spoken about as if they're the same thing. But when you dig deeper, the nuances becomes quite clear. And so does their impact on equity, culture, and retention. To help us explore this, I'm joined by someone who knows the space inside out, Lindiwe Davis, Google's culture coach and also a podcaster herself. She spent years working with leaders and teams and know how to build inclusive, thriving workplaces. And I couldn't think of a better person to have this conversation with. So, Lynn, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
making the time.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Before we dive into the main conversation, I'd love for our listeners to get to know the person behind the work. So, could you share a little bit about your professional journey so far and what led you to where you are today?
Yeah, no problem, no problem. Thank you so much for inviting me here. And thank you so much for pronouncing my name. So many people, we have these beautiful names, and sometimes I know it's hard for people to get them right, but that's part of being inclusive, right? Wanting to make sure that we name people the thing that they want to be named. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. But I have been working for the last 30 years. 27 of those years have been in corporate America. And I started this journey in the financial industry, moved over to marketing and startups, and then landed myself in tech. And of course, I'm also a founder. I'm a founder of a company called FutureState Collective, which focuses on coaching, consulting, and of course, me being a speaker and a moderator and media interviewer. That's my passion work because I care so much about getting people into this place of understanding their own voice. That's like the crux of my coaching, the message of my coaching and consulting when I'm going to companies or, maybe I'm doing one-on-one coaching is your voice is very powerful. And if you understood your level of courage, you will use your voice per your level of courage so that you can better activate in your role, better activate in your community, better activate in situations where things are just not quite right, which in corporate America, there's a lot of things that are a little, how do I say, tricky or challenging. So I have worked across several industries, as I said, marketing, the financial industry, tech, etc. And now I'm building a company as well for myself. But I can tell you right now, when it comes to coaching, for example, or when you are an advisor or even a sponsor for someone, the biggest thing I've learned over these last 3 decades is that people just want to be acknowledged. And I think that's super, super important. You have to acknowledge the person. You have to acknowledge where they want to go. And you have to also acknowledge the challenges that they face. Right. So between you and I, we're going to face different challenges. However, because we're both identifying as women, that's a whole nother challenge as well. So I think understanding people, acknowledging people, and then being willing to acknowledge where it is they're coming from and where they're trying to go. These are foundational practices and things that I like to try to enable in other people, which is like the crux of my journey all these years.
Absolutely. Very well said. And thank you for sharing your journey with us. I'm sure
Yeah.
listeners would love to know you more. Now, with your
Yeah.
permission, I'd like to dive straight into today's topic. You
Let's
know,
do it.
great. I often notice when these conversations come up, people tend to use mentoring and coaching almost interchangeably, as if they are the same thing. But when
Mhm.
we're talking about creating diverse leaders, I feel like the nuance really, really matters because each approach can again bring very different outcomes. So, then, in your view, do mentoring and coaching actually serve different purposes in this context?
Yes, they do. And I want to talk a little bit about both. So when we're thinking about inclusive communities or just inclusive organizational cultures and even teams, if you're thinking about a mentor, let's just say you're on a team right now, right? And you notice on that team that maybe the team is new. Sometimes we get find ourselves in organizations and there's a lot of reorgs and changes and things like that. And you land on a team that's building its culture. So you don't really know what happened before. It's a good idea to seek out a mentor. It doesn't mean they have to be on that team. It doesn't mean they have to be in the org. They could be in the company. A mentor could also be outside the company. But the purpose of a mentor is for someone who can sit there and listen to what's going on with your day to day and really give you guidance around the work that you're doing. Also, the mentor should know a little bit more about your work, especially if your mentor is inside the company you work for. In other words, this person is going to have a first class ticket to what you are doing on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And so this person is going to be able to speak to the company. They're going to be able to speak to the work that you're doing so that when you're not in the room, they can speak on your behalf, right? This also brings up another part of this conversation, which is a sponsor. A sponsor is also different in the sense of this person is really going to speak on your behalf across the board. So they don't even, a sponsor could be someone who's like, oh, I know this person, I know their character, I know they've worked really hard. And then they could jump into a room with other leaders, for example, and talk about your work very clearly, even though they may not be as close to it, but they know you. They know your character. So you start to see the difference. Then we loop in coaching. Coaching is an aspect of this where this is a person who doesn't have to be at the company. They don't even have to be in your industry. If you find yourself in need of a coach, this person is really going to look at your entire portfolio of life. They're going to look at your entire breadth of work experience, right? And then they're going to start to talk to you about your experiences, your education, your goals, your life goals. So that person, the coach, is really meant to kind of take all of your packaging and help you synthesize those things down so that you can get more clear and more aligned about your own personal goals outside of the company that you may be working for, or outside of the company that you're building, or outside of the teams and structures that we're all so used to. That coach is going to help you kind of synthesize all of those things into a beautiful package for yourself so you can see more clearly and you feel more aligned within yourself.
Absolutely. That's really interesting, I must say.
Yeah.
And if we zoom in a little, especially for employees who come from underrepresented groups, dynamics again shift. You
Yeah.
know, I believe access is often the missing piece, and a really strong mentoring relationship can sometimes open doors that people
Yeah.
might otherwise even know exist, let alone say. So, for employees from underrepresented groups, what does a strong mentoring relationship unlock that they might not always get access to otherwise?
Yeah, so with a strong mentoring relationship, especially going back to what I said, if your mentor is inside the company and they know the company culture, I think that person having this kind of access to you and what you're going through on that team or in that organization is going to be very, very key because it's with the way that things are moving professionally right now in various ecosystems across all the industries, things are changing very rapidly. So that mentor is going to be right there with you with all of those changes that are happening within your team, your organization, and within your said industry. The first thing I think that can be unlocked, though, is understanding the gaps of what you might need. Meaning, if you were talking to your mentor, and let's just say you're like, oh, I want to find out more about AI. I want to find out how I can use AI more within my job, for example. Then you and the mentor can actually take a look at what the company is already offering in terms of training. Because a lot of times when you come into companies, whether you are part of an underrepresented group, gender, etc., that information may not be as loud. Sometimes when you get into a company, you just have to track it down and do all of these things, and there's no community available. There's no employee resource group available. Sometimes there's not even real training set up. You just kind of have to get out there and get it. So a mentor is going to help you unlock the resources that you need to better succeed at your job and to amplify whatever education you're trying to utilize within the company. The second thing to keep in mind is that when you get into companies, benefits. A lot of times we get into large companies, we don't know the pathway to utilizing the benefits. But a mentor, a person that's been there, a person that has an understanding of the company, the culture, the offerings, they can help you unlock how to use your benefits. As a person who is coming from a underrepresented group, or again, an underrepresented gender within a company, this is super important. You know what the surface benefits are because you would have signed your offer letter, but there is more than likely a slew of things that are going on within the company. And when you are connected to the right people, you can unlock some of those things for yourself and how you want to utilize your time as you continue to grow as a person. The third thing is network. With a mentor, you can unlock additional people attached to them. Sometimes a mentor can sit down and listen to your story. You can talk through what your day-to-day looks like. You can talk through what's going on with your current project. They may know someone in their network that can help you or assist you or give you another perspective to assist you to get to execution in whatever project or program you are building. Those three things right there are super, super important when it comes to succeeding in a company. And it can make the difference for a person who is part of an underrepresented group, because a lot of times you may feel like the fish out of water. Sometimes you may be the only person in your community that is a part of this company that looks like you. That happens, right? If the company doesn't have like an employee resource group, your mentor is going to be someone who's going to help you unlock some of the things around you that you might not have had access to before.
Right. Again, you have highlighted a few very important points.
Yeah.
But I would like you to elaborate a little more on how we can use mentors for
Mhm.
better networking, because somewhere I
Oh,
believe that networking is something that people from underrepresented groups really need. I
yeah.
believe that. I strongly believe that. So how can they really reach out their mentors to get better at networking, if in case the mentor themselves don't get it in the first place?
Yeah. I think sometimes, and this is very key, and you bring up a great point, that even mentors are not necessarily going to have every single answer or connection or the know-how for every single thing. But I will say in that example, let's just say you have a mentor who's connected to a lot of different groups and leaders, right? They may know about something that's coming up that they're like, oh, you should go to that. You should attend.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something internal to the company that wasn't advertised. And they're like, oh, you should come along. I'm actually going to be there. It's an in-person event or it's a virtual event. But if that's not the case, then I would say, paying attention to the company communications that come out, that's a super, super key thing. A lot of times, we get a lot of emails. We're not even paying attention to what's going on, quite honestly. And so I say for folks, when you are receiving communications from your organization, right, for example. So let's just say you sit in an org in a company and they send out newsletters. Perfect example. A lot of times in those newsletters, there's going to be little events and get-togethers and those types of things that are sitting in the newsletter. So it's a good idea to tap into those things. Okay. The second thing is that a lot of times companies will have employee resource groups. They may call them something different, but employee resource groups are those groups that kind of cater to women, for example. So you have a women at group said company. You have a Black plus at group at said company. You have an Asian plus at group at said company. You have a LGBTQIA at group. You have a neurodiverse at group. So you see what I'm saying? A lot of communities can be existing within your company, and those communities often have an extreme amount of events for you to get to know people, to learn more about culture, et cetera, et cetera. And for the record, employee resource groups are not meant for just that community. They're actually meant for everyone to come into the fold and learn more about friends, building out friendships, building out networks, building out those communities. But I would say pay close attention to what those groups are doing, because there's a lot of amazing events, etc. Another way to start to network yourself throughout the company, for example, is training. There's training all of the time inside of a lot of different companies. And so let's just say you sign up for a training. It's not a requirement. It's not part of a policy, but you notice that the company is hosting a training or that your organization is hosting a training. Why not sign up for it? There's going to be other people within that space. It's a good idea to work together with those people and then reach out to the trainer, get to know the trainer, right? Networking isn't always this formal thing where after work, you go somewhere, you have a drink, right? Sometimes it's literally, oh, I went to this training. Oh, I went to this company event. Oh, I went to this internal community building exercise. Oh, I went to a lunch and learn, which a lot of spaces within companies host. So I think there's broader ways to kind of expand your reach. But I think one of the things about networking too is that if you're not a person who doesn't like to start those conversations because you're not comfortable or you're not practiced in that, then I would say start with the small things. Start with those smaller events that are being hosted within the company before you go to a network mixer, right? That's more informal externally. Start with a training. Start with working with your mentor to see if they've heard about some things that they think you would be interested in, so that you can start to build that networking muscle. And just remember, when it comes to networking, nothing should be forced. It really is just meeting people who have the same or similar interests, or meeting people who do things differently than you, and having an open mind. Nothing has to be forced. It doesn't have to be transactional. It can literally be conversational. And if you feel like something can build from that, then allow it to build from that.
Great. I love the way you put that. And all
Yeah.
the points that you have mentioned, it really requires the other person to be proactive in nature.
Yes,
So it's not always the mentor or the coach coming to you, but you may have to go to them,
that's
ask,
right.
yeah, you have to reach out and at the same time stay proactive,
That's
um,
right.
and aware at the same time. So yes, yeah,
Hmm.
wonderfully put. Um, Moving on, even with the best intentions,
Yeah.
mentoring or coaching programs can end up reinforcing the very biases they were meant to break. It's that fine line between supporting growth and unintentionally reproducing old patterns. And I believe
Yeah.
this is where, organizations really must pause and ask themselves, are we truly working to level the playing field, or are we just
Yeah.
repeating the same old patterns? Not
Hmm.
exactly creating equity, but just recycling privilege, if I could say so.
Yeah.
So you like to.
Absolutely. I think with that thought process that you just laid out, it's true. Like a lot of times there'll be some sort of mentoring program that's being built out in a company. There may even be, additional coaching that's being built out by HR, for example. The one thing that I've noticed over all these years of working is that if you don't have the right people sitting in those positions that are building out those programs or leading those programs, it's not going to work. Meaning, I truly believe if you are working on the side of building out a program that's meant to support employees of any kind, it doesn't matter if we're talking about underrepresented groups, if we're talking about gender, if we're talking about intersectional identities. If you are trying to build out a program that is meant to support employees, there has to be a level of cultural competence that the person who owns building that out has. And everyone surrounding that person that's building that program, so the partners, they also have to have a level of cultural competence to build those programs out. The second thing is those folks need to also understand communication from the place of cultural competence, clarity, consistency, care, super important. All of those things fold into how it is that you understand how to treat people, because it's very key. If you're building out something that's meant to be about mentoring, or you're building out something that's meant to be about additional coaching, you, as the person who is owning that, driving that, and have your partners who are helping you, and you have some sort of VP sponsor, all of those people need to be in the mindset of their own level of education on what it is and why it is that they're doing it. But as I said before, you have to have a level of cultural competence, care, consistency, and concern for the people that you are building said programs out for. That is just the foundational things. Those are foundational attributes that you need in order to build those programs. Before you even get started, you have to ask yourself, who are the right people to build this out? And are we doing it for the right reasons? Is it serving them? What's the impact going to be? Not, oh, we just want to, we just want to build out, mentoring and say that we did it. No, that's never going to work. That's never going to work. And I'm sure many of us have been in places and spaces where you were like, oh, yeah, they got a mentoring program. And then you join the program. You're like, wait a minute. What is this?
Yes, absolutely.
This has nothing to do with assisting employees, right? Or it's not super helpful. So you have to be mindful of these things as you start to think more broadly about how to help communities and groups and employees as a whole.
Yeah. Now, when we bring younger employees into the picture, especially Gen Z, the expectations around mentoring shift quite a bit. They're not always looking for the traditional top-down model. Many of them really hate it, to be very honest. Many of them really value authenticity, two-way learning, and even reverse mentoring as part of the relationship. So it's really interesting to think about how generational perspectives are reshaping this very space.
Yeah. First of all, reverse mentoring is an excellent term. It's a relatively, I wouldn't say new, but it's definitely a term that's been around. But I think a lot more people are finding out about the term because, and just to speak on this as an example, reverse mentoring originally started out as, when younger generations coming out of school were getting into companies, having them partner with people who have been at the company for a long time, or having them partner with people who have an extreme amount of experience and putting them together to see how that relationship can be impactful for both parties. But in the last couple of years, I actually, at one point in my career, worked on reverse mentorship as a program where I specifically set that program up so that anyone, it didn't matter if they were younger or graduates or interns, if they were an experienced employee, partnering them with someone who was in an executive role and having those two folks understand each other's pathway and how they can align each other. Because more than likely, if I'm sitting in a leadership role and someone is just getting out of graduate school who doesn't look like me, who doesn't belong to my community, but somehow we ended up in the same place, that could be for a powerful elixir for people learning about each other, right? So I will say that when it comes to the younger generation, so you got interns, you've got graduates coming into companies and into the fold, I think it's very, very key to ensure that people give them a microphone. Yeah. Because these folks are coming into a space that may be sitting very traditional to where they're coming from in their generation, in the little bit of work experience that they may have, right? But coming out of school, they have a larger social index, I think, because of digital spaces, because of social media, et cetera. So they're going to be tapped in on that side. Now they need to connect with people who've been tapped into the business side of things, who've been tapped into the behaviors within business spaces. And it could end up being a beautiful merge of two worlds coming together to better understand how to be aligned within the work that they may be performing. But also, a lot of times, if you put those two people together, the two of them can come up with ways to be more effective in the work. Right? Because you have someone who's got that practice together and you're working with someone who just came out of theory. So think about these two people bridging theory and practice together. That could be very, very powerful in and of itself. And if you are someone who is working with someone who's just coming out of school or who's an intern or who has less than 10 years of work experience, less than 5 years of work experience, there's a lot to be learned because the mind has not been in this place where they've done all of these things already. They're fresh ideas. Innovation is ready. They're ready, they're excited, etc. Not to say that the experienced person isn't, but I think between these two people, when they come together, it could be a really beautiful elixir on outlooks, right? And how you can and bridge those outcomes with what it is that you want to put into said relationship or said project or said program, etc.
Yes, absolutely on point. I think your
Yeah.
response is something that is very much aligned with what Gen Z would love, but at the same time,
Yeah,
what the employers would be looking at as well. So yes.
absolutely.
So Lynn, since you are Google's own culture coach, am I allowed to ask you something regarding Google's culture?
I would say, how about you ask it from the tech space versus Google?
Okay, great. In
Hmm.
that case, yes, amazing. So there are many tech companies, again,
Hmm.
maybe not just Google, there are really many other companies as well who
Yeah.
regarding which the culture is really talked about. Um, People talk about how supportive the entire culture is. And
Hmm.
mentoring and coaching again seem to play a big role in that because they
Yeah.
don't just shape someone's career trajectory, they ripple out
Yeah.
into the culture itself. They influence how
Hmm.
people show up at work every day, whether they feel like they belong, and even how they stick around. So in your view, how do mentoring and coaching move beyond personal growth to really shape company culture overall?
Yeah. So with just within the tech space in and of itself, right? There's a lot of changes going on. There's always change going on within tech in most industries. But I will say, when it comes to mentoring or sponsorship or coaching, those things are really set up to ensure that culture is not sitting in and of itself in the same place because people are changing. If people are changing, then culture has to change, right? If innovation is changing in the tech space, for example, or innovation is growing, culture is often changing, and you need those things in place. You need mentorship, you need coaching in place to ensure that people are not being stood up on something that doesn't allow them to grow, right? So remember, I brought up AI earlier. AI is one of those things that's becoming a part of a lot of different company cultures and even just life. So if there, for example, is coaching and mentorship around how to utilize that tool within your role, and it's also allowed, that's a part of culture that's also shifting. And having those groups, mentorship and coaching available, will allow an employee to understand, yes, you have permission to use AI. Yes, you have permission to learn more. Yes, you can join us in these trainings and things like that to ensure that you are also moving forward. So I think with mentorship and with coaching, that's one of those ways. One of the ways in which you can move culture forward is through innovation if you have those programs. I think another thing to think about when it comes to culture in and of itself is, again, where are you trying to move the culture? And how are you going to use these two things to do so? And I think access is a big part of that.
Yeah.
Making sure that people have access through these programs is going to be a game changer. Meaning, if you have a bunch of amazing engineers or designers or program managers getting into tech, for example, why not set it up so that they are partnered with someone automatically when they come into a company? Why not set a pathway up for them so that they know that once I get into the company, I'm going to have somebody already partnered with me. And this person is going to be a great mentor for that first 6 months of my journey within this company and within my role. And more than likely, I'm going to be matched with someone who also does something similar to me. So it doesn't feel like I'm just flailing around trying to track down all of this information about the company and also about my role. But that's actually a good thing to do. Set up a program, a pathway program for people getting into companies. Specifically, we're talking about tech, for example. Set it up on a 6 month type alignment path and ensure that people have access to all the tools, the resources, training, make sure that they have access, right? A lot of times we get into companies and it takes weeks and weeks to get access to things. Make sure people have access to the tools and resources and guides and the principles that you're operating within. That is a way, again, to grow culture. When people feel like they are included, when they feel like they have access, when they feel like they have permission, this is where you can start to see changes in how the work that's being produced and also within the people.
So, Lynn, in the tech space itself,
Yeah.
what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that any mentor has to face when it comes to uh, mentoring their people? What are some of the
Yeah.
challenges that they face the most in tech space, particularly?
Yeah, I think when it comes to mentors in the tech space, I think the challenge here is what do they have permission to teach? What do they have permission to access in order to help and assist an employee? I like to call it button pushing power, right? Because a mentor is not, they're not a human resource specialist, for example. So they may not have the same access, obviously, as someone who's working in people operations or human resources, which is the same thing. And so I think that's going to be a challenge because let's just say you have an employee come to a mentor and they're telling them about some challenging teammates, for example. The mentor can give you guidance on what you can do, what you should do, how to file a complaint, how to file an anonymous complaint. But they themselves, because they don't work a lot of time, if your mentor doesn't work in HR, they may not have that same access as someone in a human resource position to ensure that all the steps are being followed. But they can give you the guidance on how to get to where you need to go in this example of facing challenges on your team, right? So I think access is definitely one of them. I think another challenge with mentors and companies is if the person is mentoring employees, they have their own workload, right? So, with that being said, having your own workload, being someone who can balance your workload while you're doing this work as a volunteer, because that's essentially what it is you're doing. You're volunteering to be a mentor to someone within a space.
Sure.
That takes time, right? That takes patience. That also takes organization.
Yeah.
So it's a good idea to have people who have a willingness to be all three of those things. But I also think that sometimes you get into being a mentor and you find out my bandwidth is too small. You don't have a lot of bandwidth. And so that could be a challenge as well. And you might end up with a shortage of not having enough mentors to fill said program that you're trying to build. Okay. I think one of the third things I think about with challenges that mentors face is culture. A lot of times you raise your hand and you say, yes, I want to be a mentor. I want to be a mentor. But you haven't thought all the way through some of the folks that may be coming through said program of mentoring. Sometimes there could be a language barrier. Sometimes it just could be cultural behaviors that are innate to said person that belongs to said community, right? And so that mentor is going to have to get up to speed naturally in that way with understanding this person and or other individuals that they may be mentoring, right? So although that may be a challenge in the beginning, I think that's something that people can actually turn into a positive outcome during the relationship. It's just going to take some time.
True. That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And we're reaching out the end of today's episode, Lynn. I want to shift gears and look a little into the future.
Okay.
As you can see, the workplace is shifting so fast. Hybrid work has already redefined how we connect, and AI is starting to shape learning and development in ways we couldn't have imagined a few years ago. It feels like the way we build leaders tomorrow might look very different from what we used to. So, as a final thought, what do you imagine mentoring and coaching will look like for the next generation of diverse leaders?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think with the innovation and this additional round of new technology, new movement, particularly around AI. I think that there's something about really using this tool to the advantage of someone who's mentoring and coaching folks. Meaning, if you find yourself being a mentor to someone who doesn't do the same work as you, for example, why not do some research? Why not find a way to utilize the tool, utilize AI, for example, as a tool to assist you in pulling reference points, data, synthesizing that all into a space so that you can use that for your own way of approaching mentoring someone in whatever space that is, right? A lot of times when you are coaching someone or talking to someone or mentoring someone, it's always nice to have additional information, right? I don't think it's ever enough to just have your authentic, I shouldn't say that. I don't think it's ever enough to just have your experiences when it comes to other people that you're trying to impact. Like, it's good. That's good to have your own experiences. You need that. But you also need research, right? So I think using those tools in a deeper manner and bridging your experience and research together when you are mentoring someone and coaching someone, that's going to be super helpful. And I think that's where both of these spaces are headed. And make no mistake about it, a person who's a mentor oftentimes is a coach as well. And so although you can differentiate those two things, a lot of times you'll find that someone who is a coach is also a mentor. I happen to be one of those people. I'm someone who's a coach, a consultant, many things, but I also have a history of mentoring other people as well. And I think that that also has to do with the way that I think about the future state of work. For example, the future state of work, we are not in the time of, let's just go into the office 9 to 5. We're going to look at these walls that look green and salmon, some bland color. No, we're in a time right now where hybrid work and remote work, these are things that we could and should still be doing, quite honestly. Studies show that people are much more effective and much more productive, honestly, when they're working remotely. But hybrid work is also effective as well because people have the opportunity to split their time between the office and balancing their home life while still getting their jobs done, right? There's a wellness factors here. So I think with mentors and coaches, as it relates to underrepresented groups as well, there's the wellness factor attached to that. Having people in place to ensure that people feel like they have a place to kind of sit down and talk through the day, sit down and talk through their performance without their leader, without their, teammates. The wellness factor is super, super important. And having someone who's keen on understanding why wellness is an important factor within how it is that you're trying to gravitate and elevate yourself, this is also going to be a part of future work. It's already becoming, if not already here. It's just going to be a little bit louder, the wellness factor.
True. Lynn, you have responded to all my queries, all the questions that I had very beautifully, very
Thank
lucidly.
you.
So thank you so much for joining in. I really loved this conversation that we had. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of today's conversation, Lynn. So before we wrap up, is there a final message you'd like to leave with our listeners? I'm sure
Yeah.
they'd love to hear it. And also, what's the best way for them to connect with you if they'd like to continue the conversation?
Yeah. So one of my mantras, and I wouldn't even call it a mantra, I would say one of the things that I want for all of you listening is that I want you to remember that you deserve a good life. You deserve to live a really good life. And don't ever forget that your voice is powerful. It doesn't have to be the loudest thing in the room. You just have to know how to use it, right? And you have to know how to use it based off of your level of courage. That's what's going to get you to activate in the spaces that you care about and activate to be more helpful, more positively impactful to other people. But never forget that you deserve a good life. Okay. No matter what it is that you're going through, no matter how hard the challenges may be, everything can still work out for you as well. As far as where to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn, of course, using my whole name. You can find me on IG using my first name, LINDIWE _speaks. And you can also just find me through my business channel on IG as well, Future State _ Collective. So with that, I so appreciate you having me here. I had a good time. It was a good conversation. And hopefully I get to hear from some of your listeners as well.
Yes, absolutely. My biggest takeaway from this final message of yours is that, our voice is our real power.
That's
And
right.
we all of us, we deserve a good, dignified life.
That's
So
right.
you've beautifully said that. So thank you so much, Lynn, once again
Thank
for
you.
joining. And yeah, it was a pleasure to have you on the show.
It was wonderful meeting you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers Podcast YouTube channel for new episodes.